Hey, how you getting on? Today on the Overthinking channel, I conduct a little test to see if I can quantify the tonal effect of pickup changes in electric guitars. So quick introduction before I tell you about the test and the setup. What prompted this test? Well, a year ago or maybe two, my 30s have been a bit of a blur, Glenn Fricker made a video in which he tested guitar pickups, and he pretty much came to the conclusion, if memory serves correct, that tonally, they don't really matter. As long as they don't make noise, as long as they're quiet, they're pretty much the same. And maybe that's true in a recording context. Maybe in that context, their tonal effects are negligible. Yeah. But that doesn't really reflect my experience with pickups. About 7-8 years ago, I went through a long phase in which I went probably through 50 different pickups. If you know my channel, you know I'm an obsessive dude. And it took me quite a while to find the pickups I like. I found them quite different and they varied from guitar to guitar. So one could put that down to confirmation bias. Oh, these expensive pickups are bound to sound good. They sound better than the old ones. But my experience was the opposite. The most expensive set of pickups I bought, I ended up not liking so much. And other pickups surprised me, but I never really recorded them. I never made a test to actually verify that. And that's what I want to do today. Now, this is going to be a bit of a quick test, maybe a test balloon for a bigger test down the road. So I'm trying to gather some experience here because this test has some challenges when it comes to the methodology. Because usually my tests focus on parts of the signal chain that come after the guitar, so amps, speakers, or microphones, which makes it quite easy. Either I reamp a performance through the signal chain, and I can look at the frequency responses there in Vox Angle Span, or I can just use Room EQ Wizard and send a sweep through the signal chain and look at frequency response graphs and draw my conclusions there. Now with guitars and pickups, the interesting part I want to look at, obviously, is before the part of the signal chain I just mentioned, so I can't use reamping. I don't really have the means to build a robot that can play my guitar so we have repeatable performances. So I'm going to have to play the guitar myself. And as I'm not the best guitar player on YouTube, probably among the worst, I'm going to have to keep these performances very simple so we can do that. I'm just going to be strumming some chords, maybe some open string stuff, maybe a few chugs, maybe a very simple melody. Played several times as closely as I can, performance-wise, one to each other, so that we can then use the frequency analysis tool, Vox Angle Span Plus, to see if there are any differences. And I'm going to be playing these performances several times per guitar and per pickup because I want to look at different aspects. I want to record these performances once going straight into the interface so we can just have a look at what is coming out of the guitar. Then I'm going to play a performance going into a classic signal chain. I'm going to be using this Diesel demo into my Mesa oversized cab here with a vintage 30 from the year 2003 with a Shure SM57, so the classic recording chain. I'm choosing a Diesel amp because I have the impression they react very sensitively to pickups, cable lengths, and all that stuff. Now you might ask, why not use a DI box and use the same performance for the amp part and the DI part? And the thing is, a DI box is another component in between. There's transformers in there, and the output of the DI box goes into a microphone preamp. So there's all kinds of things that might color that. So recording a DI with a DI box, I don't want to do that today. I want to go straight into the interface because I think those are probably the primary two use cases for electric guitars these days anyway. One, the classic recording chain, meaning going into an amp and speaker, or maybe possibly a low box, but still there's a real amp in play. And the other is probably most guys will go straight into the interface and use an amp sim. So meet the test subjects. One is this 2010 Gibson Les Paul Studio in warm brown or faded brown, I don't know. And that currently has a set of Seymour Duncan Black Winters in there. And the Black Winters are my favorite pickup set by Seymour Duncan by far. I have these in several guitars and I love these. However, in this guitar, they're not working super well for me. I don't mind them, they don't sound bad, but they don't perform as well as they do on other guitars. And that could do with the pods and everything, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but my buddy Simon sold me his set of Bare Knuckle Polymath pickups. So these are going to be going in there. In this guitar, we're going to be looking at the bridge pickup and the neck pickup. And I've got another guitar here. This is my Gibson SG Special Raw Power. This is made completely of maple from 2009, limited series. This is one of my favorite guitars, and you'd think an all maple guitar would sound excruciatingly bright if you believe in tone wood, but that's a different discussion. This has a Seymour Duncan Black Winter in the bridge as well. It has a pearly gates in the neck from Seymour Duncan. Leaving that as it is, I love the Black Winter in this guitar. But a lot of you guys have complained in my in my speaker videos that I use too high output pickups. In this case, the Black Winter is set very, very low because I think it sounds good with that. This guitar is perfect to me, but I still want to try a different pickup in this guitar. Yeah, just for the sake of the test. And that is also a Bare Knuckle pickup. This is a True Grit, which my buddy Simon, same buddy, gave me a gift of last year, or maybe 2 years ago, once again. It's been sitting in this box for a while, and today is finally its day. In this guitar, I'm only going to be looking at the bridge pickup, as I said. However, I'm going to be adjusting the height in this one as well. Because the Black Winter is quite low in this, and is a high output pickup, it works. The True Grit is kind of a medium to high output pickup, meaning that when it's so low, the signal might be too weak. So in this guitar, we're going to be adjusting the height as well. I'm going to be setting the pickup heights the same for the Black Winter and the Polymath in the Les Paul Studio. But in the SG Special, we're going to run the test with the True Grit at the same height as the Seymour Duncan Black Winter, and one height adjusted to taste according to my ear. So that was long-winded, wasn't it? I think that should cover most of it. I'm going to be recording very simple music direct to the interface and into the amps. Then I'm going to be changing out the pickups, doing all that stuff, and then I'll meet you back for a little analysis. So I've done the recording. I've recorded my little riff snippets for the A-B testing, which sucked, by the way, because those were very boring riffs. I had to keep them simple because I'm a terrible guitarist. But I really had underestimated how many times I would have to record this. So 3 times per pickup, 1 direct into the interface, 1 dirty, 1 clean. And for the True Grit and the SG, the same was height adjusted. So if I calculated correctly, which I probably haven't, that's 21 times, plus several more times because I screwed up because, as I said, I'm a terrible guitarist. The riff snippets I recorded sound like this. Let me just unmute one of those here. This Black Winter Dirt in the Les Paul. We have 1 slow chords. Yes, very interesting. Then we have kind of bouncy modern stuff. That gets annoying very quickly. 1 crappy melody. And 1 riff that is much more me, but simplified. And I hoped that at least one of those riff snippets, melodies would help us in an A-B test assess the differences between the pickups. I've done a little bit of preliminary assessment here just so I was able to prepare samples for our analysis here, but I haven't gone into it in too much depth. A few things I need to add though. I mentioned in the intro that I didn't want to use a DI box for one thing because it would color the sound through the preamp of the interface. Of course, if I plug the guitar straight into that interface, it will be colored by the exact same preamp, so that was wrong. However, I still didn't want to use a DI box because of the transformers in that, and it's an extra component that could have the potential to color the sound, which I didn't want for this test. I set up the pickup heights using this vernier calipers here with the so-called caliper dong. That's what I like to call it anyway. And I measured just the distance between the string and the pole piece of the respective pickup. I tuned the guitars using the Peterson Strobo Stomp HD stroke tuner. These are excellent, by the way, very, very precise. I never want to use another tuner in my life. One more thing, I mentioned Glenn Fricker in the intro, and I know he's a polarizing figure, and in some of my vintage 30 focused videos, you guys have voiced your very strong opinions, and you're free to do that. That's your right. I just want to ask you guys to keep it civil down there because, I don't personally always agree with the assessment Glenn Fricker makes, the assessments. Some I think are quite extreme based on results that aren't too clear for me. I don't always agree with his methodologies. I do, however, believe at the same time that his channel is full of genuinely good advice. I probably wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have made several videos if it hadn't been for his channel. And if it weren't for his how to use a camera for musicians, I probably wouldn't have a channel at all. And he's making us discuss things. He's pointing things out. And I think that is very important. And we need to give him credit for at least that. I think that is very important. And I appreciate Glenn Fricker for, you know, sometimes even making a hot take for us to investigate and do our own testing and discuss later. So yeah, enough yapping. Let's get into the test. I've got this Reaper project here, as you've seen, and I'm using a few plugins for my assessment. Regular viewers will know these. One is AB Assist 2, which allows us to switch back and forth between two parallel tracks in our DAW just in quick succession with a push of a button like here, boop, 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 to, you know, listen to the differences more accurately. The other plugin I'll be using is Voxengo Span Plus, which does fast Fourier transformations, FFTs, so in essence, frequency response graphs of the sources while we're playing them. A is always going to be before. So in this example, Black Winters, I'm going to start off with the Les Paul, comparing the Black Winters A before to B after. Anyway, B are the bare knuckle pickups, that's after. And in the graphs, A is going to be, or before the Black Winters is red, and after the bare knuckle pickups is blue. And I started off by listening to the long chords because I thought that will probably be the best candidate to hear the differences. So let's get into it. A and red, Black Winter, B and blue, bare knuckles. So I can hear differences, and more than the graphs would indicate to me. The graphs show us, though, that the Black Winters compared to the polymaths in this guitar, these seem to have an extended high and low end. The low end with the Black Winters seems to sound a little bigger and tighter at the same time to me. The differences in low end and high end seem to be pretty consistent. There's a bit too much going on, too many transients between that spectrum to really make any definitive conclusions. Let's check out the DI tracks for that. And I've smoothed out this these frequency response graphs a little bit by changing the block size. If I go back to the default settings, just so you know, it looks a whole lot more messy in the high end. See, there's just so much going on there. It doesn't really help us draw any meaningful conclusions, so I'm applying a little more filtering. But what the DIs show us that there's a big difference in output between the pickups. So the amplifier is getting hit with with signals that are at different levels, which might explain some of the differences we hear on the dirty track. Because the Black Winter has so much more output, it might act a bit like if you were to put a boost in front of the amplifier, tightening up the low end a bit. Still, this riff didn't turn out to be as useful to me for comparing these sounds as I thought it would, because the tones just fade out too quickly. And to my surprise, probably my chuggy riff at the end is a little more suited. So I want to listen to that one. Again, we see the differences in high and low end, and the Black Winter just sounds more aggressive and in your face to me, as well as a bit bigger, a bit beefier. Let's check out the DIs for that. And again, we can hear that the differences in output are quite large, well, maybe not large, but they're noticeable. So the question I had, how much of the differences we hear with the amplifier can be attributed to EQ differences in the pickups, and how much is just output difference? Meaning the higher output signal might push the front end of the amp into saturation for certain frequencies, which might explain why the low end seems different with the Black Winter. Or to get a better picture of that, what I did next is I took the DI signals and I normalized them. And there seems to be more low end in the Black Winters. Apart from that, it's still hard to tell if there's many meaningful EQ differences here in the mids, but it seems that around 3 to 4K. There seems to be a bit of a difference there. I think the Black Winter might be a little spikier there, and the polymath might be pulled back a little bit. Just for good measure, I normalized the dirty tracks next to see how that affects the differences we may perceive. The differences seem less noticeable to me. However, the Black Winters still seem to have an extended low and top end compared to the polymaths. For good measure, I listened to the clean recordings as well. And really, that just seems like a slightly processed DI signal with a low pass. The speaker does its filtering there. But again, we notice the differences in output of the pickups. With the Black Winters, the amps doesn't stay clean. It kind of, gets into that slightly distorted territory, and it's much louder. But much like with the speaker videos, the clean tones really don't help me an awful lot determine differences between two sources. It's really the distorted tracks that help me, where I can hear. There's just more information for me to hear. Let's check out the neck pickup. For those, I tried that melody line because that's what I would use a neck pickup for mostly. Similar to the impression I get with the bridge pickups, the Black Winters are more in your face, there's slightly more high-end information, and maybe a bit of a bigger low end. Let's see how the DIs behave for that lick. Again, like between 4 and 5K, the Black Winters seem more spiky. And again, there's a noticeable difference in levels, so output levels of the pickups. Let's go back to the riff we used for the bridge pickups though. Again, the Black Winter just seems a little more aggressive. I don't notice so much of a difference in the low end for that riff, but the Black Winter seem to have more high-end information. Let's move on to the SG. In the SG, as I mentioned in the intro, the Black Winter is or was mounted comparatively low. I think from the pole piece to the low E, which is a C sharp in that guitar, I almost had 8 millimeters. I'd have to check my note, but it was pretty low. because I liked how the Black Winter sounded in that. At first, I mounted the True Grit at the same height, already assuming that that might be a little low for that pickup, but we wanted to, or I wanted to find out what the mounting distance does to the tone as well. So I started off with that and then moved it up later, according to taste, according to my ear. What I want to listen to first is that same riff again, first Black Winter versus True Grit at the same height. And I expect more of a difference here, if I'm honest. Funnily enough, there seems to be less of a difference. Again, the Black Winter seems to have more low end than the Bare Knuckle, but the differences in high end are less noticeable. Let's check out how the differences change with a height adjusted True Grit. So the True Grit moved further, closer to the string. Is the difference bigger there? Let's move back. That's strange. The differences seem larger. Well, maybe it's not too strange that, probably they're closer when they're at the same height. Let's check out how the True Grit pickup settings or height settings compare to each other for good measure. A in this case is the height adjusted True Grit, so moved closer to the string, and B is the True Grit in the default position, so almost 8 or 7.5 millimeters away from the string. There's a slight difference, but I find it very hard to pinpoint. As a matter of fact, the differences are much less pronounced than I expected that to be. So I don't know what to do with that. Let's check out the DIs for that riff in that guitar with the height adjusted True Grit, but I normalized the DIs again, so we may be able to see and hear some differences in EQ. There are differences, and we can see them in the graphs. Some, they pop up a bit here and there, but in general, the differences to my ears are huge. So where does that leave us? Right, so you may have noticed the sneaky outfit change here. That's because this is actually a day later. I had already completed this video fully with final thoughts and send off and shameless Patreon and affiliate plug, but something was bothering me. I had this nagging voice in my head. I was a little frustrated with this video. The main reason is because there are at least 3 parameters in this test that are really hard to isolate from each other to make sense of. One is the performance aspect. Each time I play this, I might have played a little different, and there's not an awful lot I can do about that other than try to suck less, which I might. And the other is really, I can't really pinpoint which differences in the final tone, because they do sound different, comes from the sheer output difference and what comes from an EQ difference. And that really bothered me. Then I had an idea. I could normalize the DI tracks for the Les Paul, for example, and reamp those DIs through the amplifier, through the Digital Demo. And I've done just that now. And before I send you off for the how manyth time I'm filming this, I want to do a quick A/B listening session to the chuggy riff with normalized DIs, both for the Black Winter and for the Bare Knuckle Polymath, through the Digital Demo. So A, as before, is the Black Winter, and B is the polymath. Now the tones are even closer to each other than they were before. There still is a slight difference. I still feel like the Black Winter has a bigger bottom end than or bigger low end than the polymaths have. There is some slight variation in the mids, but that could be the performance. No, probably not. There is a slight difference. There is an EQ difference. The high-end differences aren't so noticeable anymore, at least to me. And that leads me to the end of the video for the second time. And first, I need to address the shortcomings of my test. As I mentioned just before now, it's really hard to isolate different parameters such as performance, the EQ difference, and the output difference of the pickups. And the limitation of my test is this test wasn't really designed. I just had these pickups, and I figured changing them out in the guitars would be a good opportunity to devise a little test to find the differences. And I've learned an awful lot from this video, even though it wasn't a lot of fun to make. And if I were to do this properly, I would, for one thing, choose different pickups that are more different from each other. Because even though the Black Winters and the Bare Knuckles in this video, they use different magnets. The Black Winters have ceramic magnets, and the Bare Knuckle pickups both have Alnico 5 magnets, if I recall correctly. They might be a little too similar to each other for this test, because both ceramic and Alnico 5 magnets are popular in high gain pickups, and the bridge pickups at least all had relatively close DC resistances or impedances to each other. I think the Black Winter clocks in at 16.6 kilo ohms. The True Grid is at the high 13s or low 14s, and the polymaths are somewhere in between 14 something kilo ohms, if I recall correctly. And also, if you look at the EQ profiles that the pickup manufacturers post on their websites, they're quite similar. All three pickups slightly pulled back on the lows, elevated high ends and mids. The polymath even slightly bumped in the mids. I think the True Grids and the Black Winters look very similar if you look at the bar graphs. And to be honest, I never really paid much attention to these bar graphs. But seeing as how the True Grid and the Black Winter sounded closer to each other in the SG, at least to my ears, than the polymaths and the Black Winters, maybe these graphs deserve more credit than I was giving them. But to get back to the point I'm trying to make, if I were to actually build a test to find differences in pickups or find out if they make a big difference at all, I would choose vastly different pickups from each other. So ceramic magnets, maybe some magnets more associated with lower or mid-gain pickups like Alnico 2s, Alnico 4s, stuff like that, and different wines as well. So pickups with high DC resistances such as the Black Winters, but also pickups that have considerably lower resistances like Alnico 2 Pros or a Gibson 490T, Burst Bucker, something like that. Something that maybe has 7 to 8 or maybe 9 kilo ohms instead of in the double digits like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, like the pickups I had in this test. Also, I would use more than one amp. I would use several different amps because it could be that the amps react differently to the output differences of the pickups. Some amps might be more sensitive to the level differences, which potentially could mask EQ differences. Long story short, let me know if you'd want to see a video like that, because as I mentioned probably 5 times, this isn't fun. This kind of sucked to make, but I was very interested in the results. And if you guys are interested as well, we might do another test with an expanded range of pickups and slightly improved methodology. So let me know in the comments down below. However, based solely on the observations of this test, could be that Glenn Fricker is onto something. I would say that the minor differences we saw and heard in this test would probably not matter much in a full mix. I mean, there are other components in the signal chain which have far bigger impacts, such as the amplifier, the speaker cabinet, and speaker, of course, as well as the microphone. However, I would argue that despite the similarities, pickups matter for the performance aspect. They may not matter so much in the end result of a recording, but for the recording process, I think they could make all the difference, because recording, at least to me, is a high performance situation. And whether you're recording a track or you're in a job interview, you want to feel comfortable. You don't want to feel distracted by an itch or some weird feeling. You just want to focus on your performance. And I think having the right pickup in your guitar that make you feel comfortable, that make the amp or the signal chain react in the way you want it to, particularly in the low end, as we could see in here with the black winters here, I think that can make a huge difference in the performance of recording. But what do I know? I'm just an idiot sitting at home in his room. So yeah, I think that's almost all I have to say for today. If you'd like to support me, I have a Patreon where I upload IRs for the speakers I demo, as well as amp captures now. And you can support me by using my affiliate links. Buy used, but if you can't avoid buying new, please use my affiliate links. That helps me an awful lot. Thank you so much for watching. Good night, good day, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.